Welcome to Restoring Education in America with Priscilla Ron. She's a master educator and author, leading the conversation to restore the American mind through wisdom, virtue, and truth.
Welcome, everybody, to my show, Restoring Education in America. I'm your host, Priscilla Ron, and I'm so excited that you decided to join the conversation today. You know, we talk about all things education, and I have a big heart, not just for public school educators, but for homeschool educators. And I'm bringing my special guest to the stage, none other than Miss April Chapman. Hi, April.
Hey, beautiful. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and I'm so excited. I know you're so busy. You're not just a homeschool mom, but you are a jet setter. And for those people who may not know who you are, I'm going to share your bio, and then we can get into it, okay?
Sure.
So Miss April Chapman is a Project 21 ambassador, and she is a Christian conservative speaker, author, and independent media personality. As host of the Unshakeable with April Chapman podcast, she discusses all things social, cultural, political, and theological from a biblical perspective. April has previously served as the Assistant State Director and Georgia State Advisor for Blexit and was also active with the Black Voices for Trump Coalition. As a pro-life advocate, April has a personal mission to defend the lives of our most precious image bearers. And she uses her voice to raise awareness and to speak out against what she calls womb assassination, formerly known as abortion. April was the 2022 recipient of the Douglas Leadership Institute's Defender of Life Award, and April has been the keynote speaker for the Alabama Minority GOP, Georgia Right to Life, and other auxiliary groups. Originally from Bronx, New York, April attended Spelman College, then spent 11 years in the insurance and financial services industry before owning and operating a retail home furnishing store in Georgia. April currently resides outside of Atlanta in Rockdale County, Georgia, with her amazing husband, Robert, homeschooling their 4 beautiful children, Isaiah, Brandon, and the twins, Haley and Hannah. How do you do it all, April?
By the grace of God, I'm sitting there listening to all that. Like, I don't even know how I managed to get it all done, but it literally is a labor of love, and God just equips me to do it. Yeah.
God has given you so much capacity, and you make it look easy because you're just flawless. And and you know what? The thing is, like, you're beautiful inside and out, and your podcasts, they're just from the heart, and you're so humble, and you're so generous with your time, and you're like the total package, and you're just like a Barbie mom. Like, I don't know how you do it. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Honestly, it has more to do with me just submitting to my husband's leadership and him just kind of leading and guiding me and allowing me to flourish in my gifting and just my commitment to the family and my children. It really is a whole family operation around here. Everybody's involved in some aspect of what I've got going on.
Well, you know, April, if anybody has spent any time paying attention to you, you truly do exemplify the Proverbs 31 woman, because you get up early and you are, buying and selling, and you are creating, and you are taking care of your family. And, I think about how intelligent you are and how well-spoken you are. And you could have easily said, I'm just going to send my kids to school and done my own thing, right?
Right.
But that scripture in Proverbs 31 where it says, the men are sitting at the gate and all the guys are talking to the one guy, goes, man, your wife's amazing, right? She is the creme de la creme. And I can just see how people like your husband's friends are talking about you. And I just want to encourage other women to say, to be a Proverbs 31 woman doesn't mean you have to like take charge of everything and usurp the man. Like you said, your husband is the head of your home. Same with me, but you can still be strong and creative and take care of all of the things that need to be taken care of and be doing the work of God.
Absolutely. Like I said, I attribute a lot of, I don't do it all in my own strength. And I honestly don't believe we can have it all But if God equips you and grants you the grace in order to have your hand in a myriad of other things, and you're still able to prioritize your family, that's nothing but a blessing. And you just have to be grateful for that. So that's kind of just what I'm doing.
Well, you just keep going. I want to talk about the homeschooling because, when I was talking with you and I learned that you're a homeschool mom, I'm like, oh, I definitely want to have a conversation with you because I know for me that would have been a really intimidating thing. I've been in public education my whole entire life, and I think about parents who may not be happy with the public education system, who might want to take that on, and how daunting it might be. Now, I have a degree in education. Might be less scary for me, but how did you and your husband decide that was this always the path that you were going to be on, or did you kind of end up in it later on after your children were born?
No, absolutely. I kind of pulled from my origin story in that even though I was public school educated, my mother was a city employee and she had a very generous maternity leave. And she was home with me until I was 4 and actually almost school age, almost 5 years old. And so my mother is who taught me my address and my phone number and my alphabets and how to count. And so I had already had a slight introduction to an informal homeschool. And so when my husband and I got married and decided, well, we didn't decide to start a family. It happened. But I immediately knew when our firstborn was 2 years old that homeschooling was going to be the way to go. I never once questioned my ability or thought that I was inadequate and couldn't do it. I said, the Lord has given me this little boy and I know him better than anyone else. Who better suited to pour into my child and to educate him in all of the rudiments that I felt that a well-adjusted child needed to be equipped with. So we started out using a lot of faith-based curriculum here and there. We didn't spend a lot of money. Homeschooling is so affordable, but it first has to begin with a desire. I am always encouraging moms to submit that desire to the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. So if you're saying, I want to be a good shepherd over this baby, this life that you've given me, Lord, give me the strength and equip me to do that, He will honor such a request. And that's really just what we did. We started when Isaiah was 4, and then right behind him, his younger brother is barely 20 months behind him, and then the twins were barely 20 months right behind him. So we had a full schoolhouse, literally. Homeschooling is all they know. They have never stepped foot in a government school at all. They have no point of reference for what that's even like.
So do you have a network of other parents, or you talked about the curriculum and it being affordable? Like, what curriculum do you use, and do you have other network of parents that you work with?
Right. When we first started out, it was very, very simple. Shout out to Easy Peasy Homeschool. It's run by this homeschooling mom who, in the process of educating her own children, she would pull free resources from the internet. And after every school year, she'd compile it up, upload it to a server, and put it on the internet for free until eventually she had 12 years worth of a curriculum. And so we kind of started there because it was one income. I left corporate America so that I could educate our children. It wasn't even a question. We downsized our life and I committed everything to being home with them. And those are some of the best years of our life. We did everything together. We went to the park, studied nature. And then once we moved from the free curriculum and our small business at the time started to grow and flourish, is when I would invest in other, a little bit more pricey, but not necessary. The biggest thing that I want moms to understand that your children just require your time and attention and your commitment. And that, believe it or not, all of the bells and whistles and the resources that are out there, you don't need all of that. It's nice to have, but it's not necessary. We eventually transitioned to like BJU Press, and we did a mix of so many different amazing curriculums, Rod and Staff. if you've ever watched Little House on the Prairie in the schoolhouse and you would see the McGuffey readers, we own a set of McGuffey readers. And that's how I taught each of my children how to read. Just old school 1920s, 1800 McGuffey readers. We start with the primer and then work our way up.
If you're just now tuning in, my special guest today is Mrs. April Chapman. She's the voice behind Unshakeable with April Chapman, and she's an Uber homeschool mom. And I'm loving having this conversation. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about these misconceptions, possibly about homeschooling. What are some of the misconceptions that you've heard about homeschooling?
The biggest misconception that I've always heard that I would get from friends and family and complete strangers, like if they see you out in the middle of the school day, like, oh, are they off from school today? And I'm like, oh, no, they're homeschooled. Like when we're out, everything is about learning, whether we're cooking, cleaning, disciplining, church, everything is learning. You learn wherever you are. And the biggest misconception or the myth or pushback that I would get from people is like, well, aren't you worried about socialization? I was like, listen, the reason why we're homeschooling is because of the institutionalized socialization that children are receiving in the public education sector. Think about it. Your children are away from you for well over 10 hours a day, where some stranger whose worldview you've not vetted and you know nothing about is literally pouring and indoctrinating and socializing your children into a particular worldview. Well, I am a Christian, as well as you know, and I was very concerned about the direction that the public education system was going. I started seeing how the university system was cranking out Marxist-minded individuals, and then also in the K through 12 system, it was even worse. And so for me, it was no question. I said, I cannot send my children to Rome and then be consumed. Like, I'm going to send you the Caesar and then be confused when you come home as a Roman. And so the biggest misconception is the socialization. Now, I'll admit, homeschoolers are different. They are a special group because they're spending so much time within their own little safe space, if you will, that you have to go out of your way to put them in situations where they're going to socialize with other humans. But think about it. It's not natural for you to be with just your peer group all the time. Sometimes you're with the elderly. Sometimes you're with younger children. Sometimes you're in a mixed crowd. So for us, because we operated a public-facing business, I would bring our children up to our retail store and they would engage with people. We were active and are active, viable members of a local church. They would see people there. I'm like, children are not some special class of alien human. They're just little people at a different stage of gestation. So the socialization was definitely a myth. And then they're like, well, what about college? And I'm like, I'm the parent. I structured the curriculum into the direction that I want them to go. And we make the transcript, depending on the state that you live in. The university model in terms of education or higher education, if that's the route your children desire to go into, it's very friendly to homeschoolers. So many high schools, if you choose, you can do dual enrollment. A lot of colleges and universities actually have dual enrollment programs. The world of homeschooling has grown by leaps and bounds so much, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic, that you can literally homeschool your child, send them to university, they can go to law school, they can go to med school. The world is their oyster. But statistically, homeschoolers are way more smarter and are way more ahead than their public school counterparts. The math does not lie.
You know, we need to remind parents that they are actually the first teachers,
right,
of their children.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to go back to empowering parents to take on that role as the first mentor, the first person that actually helps to guide, because they are. And, you know, that's been the problem with public education, is because they've taught us as teachers, they're your children. We're the trusted adults, to the point where kids at public school will talk to their teachers before they talk to their parents. And then
Right.
we've seen this trend of, they'll have kids come into a private counseling session and shut the door and talk to the kids about all this personal stuff, and the parents don't even know. And then next thing you know, in some states, depending on the laws, these kids are being taken away from their parents because their parents are, the enemy. We saw parents going to public school board meetings and being called terrorists,
Right. That's precisely why I chose to homeschool, because we have a mantra in this family. We don't share custody of our children with the government. These are not community children. These are our children. These are the image bearers of the Lord that I'm going to have to give an account for, right? When I stand before a righteous and holy God, he is not going to allow me to use the excuse, say, well, I sent them to school and this is what they came out as. Listen, we're not responsible for our children's salvation. However, we are responsible for living a life before them, raising them in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and training them in the way that they should go. Well, it's going to be difficult for me to live out my deeply held biblical convictions if I have to send them to a school that is purposely in opposition to the worldview and the value system that I'm instilling in them at home. If public education was just benign and neutral, and they focused just on math and reading and history and literature, if it was just the basics, I'd be okay with that. But that is not the case. There's no neutrality in these schools. They are absolutely pushing a particular worldview. And I have to give an account for my failure to be the main teacher of my children and abdicating that responsibility to someone else. I was unwilling to do that. And I'm grateful that my husband gave me his full support. He never, sometimes I did have to reel him in as the headmaster of the school to whip these kids into shape, because they're all different kind of learners. And so I'm not saying it's easy. I am hoping that your audience will walk away with this one thing, that this is a gift that you've been given, and you only have these children for a very short period of time. And if you don't cherish that time with them and pour into them everything that you believe the Lord has called you to pour into them, then you're going to have to give an account for that. And you can't be shocked when they turn out and possibly go a different route. Not saying that homeschoolers don't stray away, they do. However, you just need to be found faithful and allow God, trust him with the results.
Now, April, did you go to public school yourself?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I am a product of the K through 12 system in Bronx, New York. But my mother allowed me to go away from my zoned school, and I am also a product of the charter school system. And then for high school, I got a scholarship and I went to boarding school away from home at 15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have something in common. I went to school in Brooklyn, New York. Shout out to PS 104.
PS 93 for me.
But okay, we were talking offline about what a failure our history education was in public education, how you and I discovered Rosenwald schools about the same time, a few months ago.
Right.
And I was so upset. I'm like, how did I not know about Rosenwald schools? I've come to find out my father went to a Rosenwald school in King Street, South Carolina, it was called Tomlinson High School. And so then I started to do all this mad research. And I was just like, why don't we know about the contribution of Americans who cared enough about this transitional time in our history to make sure that young children had access to a high quality education? How did you first hear about Rosenwald schools?
I first found out about it. So with my media company, Standard House Media, my flagship client, Vince Everett Ellison, who is a master historian and an amazing podcaster, just in passing one day, he mentioned it to me and asked me if I ever heard of it. And I said, no. And he uncovers, just like you said, during a time in history when everyone is always wanting to re-adjudicate how bad white people were to Black people in this country. And they never talk about so many of the amazing individuals that on their own recognizance understood that these newly emancipated slaves needed to be educated, and that in order for them to be able to assimilate in society, aside from if all you know is plantation life, and now they need to learn how to read and to function in their freedom, we're going to have to give back to them in some sort of way and educate them well. And that's what these Rosenwald schools were. And I had no idea that it was this network of schools that were thoroughly committed to educating Negro children. And it was top-notch education. And it was a white person, Julius Rosenwald, who was responsible for starting this, provided the seed money and everything. And it made me like you. I first felt anger. And then I felt like there's a reason why this information is actively suppressed. Because if they can keep us perpetually stuck in the past, laying the sins of the past at the feet of people alive today, and to lead them to believe that there was no virtue and that there's only one side of this story in our history, then they can keep us divided and separated. And I just refuse to harbor hatred in my heart on the basis of ethnicity. And at the end of the day, I just want to deal with what is true. That's it. Just tell me the truth. Give me an opportunity to grieve and be angry and have all kinds of feelings about that truth. But at the end of the day, the only way we can heal is if we can wrestle and grapple with this truth. So that was my initial thoughts when I learned about it. And it's just such a rich history. And sadly, trying to preserve them all today is very, very difficult because you need money and finances to do that.
My special guest today is April Chapman. She is the voice behind Unshakeable with April Chapman. You need to make sure that you are tuning into. We'll make sure we share all of her social media platforms, but she's also a wife and an Uber mom. She's a homeschool mom, and a great role model to a lot of young ladies. And we're missing some of that in this day and age. Some, good role models of how to be a godly woman and a mom, and you're intelligent and doing everything and jet setter and leading in so many conversations. And I think that's really, really critical. But you're right, this race conversation, and we've seen it in public education. We're talking about DEI and CRT and all of these different agendas coming into the school, and it's really toxic. When I think about where you and I are in history. Like, my dad grew up in segregated schools. He, went to Black only restaurants and water fountains. Like, that was his generation. Right. And I'm just one generation removed from that. I've been able to benefit from going to a public school and being free to go wherever I need to go. I don't feel like a victim. My father never raised me to feel like a victim, but I feel like we've gone backwards since 2020, since COVID, since the George Floyd. I'm like, why do I feel like we've gone back in time? And now our kids don't want to do anything and learn anything.
It's on purpose. They are absolutely subverting and trying to indoctrinate the hearts and minds of our children, because if cultural Marxism is accomplishing the goal of speaking of everything in these categories and constructs of division. So, you're white here, your gender this, and it's always categories and constructs versus understanding the idea of America. In order for us to flourish, I believe it is John Locke who said our Constitution was only designed for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. But Marxism, which is an anti-God, anti-Christian worldview, comes in and says, no, we have to abolish religion. The government is God, essentially, is what it is saying. It wants you to bow the knee to the government and move you away from faith. And the further away from faith in a biblical worldview you get, these types of worldviews will take root, and then, like gangrene, they just spread.
April, where can people follow you? Name all of your social media platforms.
Yes, you can find me mainly. My main platform of choice is YouTube. I'm Unshakable with April Chapman on YouTube, Unshakable WAPR on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Unshakable with April on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and even LinkedIn. I think I'm on LinkedIn. It's just my government name, April Chapman. But I'd love to connect with your audience.
Absolutely. We're going to promote you. Real quick, do you teach your kids how to think critically? Because that's another misconception that people think about homeschoolers in this day and age, when you're protecting them sort of from the things that are going on in the world, but they're going to have to be able to defend what they know and learn.
We do a lot of apologetic training in this house, meaning I will expose them to the alternate worldviews and ask them. They need to be able to give a reasoned defense, not just for the hope that's within them as Christians that we're raising them to be, but to be able to answer critically and logically all of the fallacies and the lies that they're being presented, such as a boy can become a girl. Like to my children, it is insanity for someone to even believe such a thing. So they are sheltered in the sense that we curate what it is that we want them to learn, but they're not sheltered in a sense as if they don't know the worldviews out there and the opposing viewpoints. They know how to defend it. They can explain and articulate it well. And it's because we've rooted them with the knowledge of God first. The first thing I taught them is, apart from the knowledge of God, you can know anything. And so all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Christ, and they can defend using God's word. That is their objective standard. And so if there's anything in terms of ideology that attempts to creep in and sway them away, we are very careful to take them to that objective standard and say, this is the explanation as to why God made marriage between a man and a woman. There are not more than two genders. There are only two, and that children are supposed to be birthed in the confines of a marriage. And all of these things, even science, we root it based on the scriptures.
Well, amen to that. And I'm looking at the time, April, and we've got to land our plane. And I'd love to have you on again in the future. To my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and catch me next time. And remember, educating the mind without the heart is no education. So seek wisdom, cultivate virtue, and speak truth.
Thanks for tuning in to Restoring Education in America with Priscilla Ron. Visit PriscillaRon.com to connect or learn how you can sponsor future episodes to keep this message of faith, freedom, and education on the air.